Hello everyone. Before we start, make sure to like and subscribe to the channel, and let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is right now. Construction sites are busy during the day. The sound of tools, shouting voices, and machines filling the air. But at night, when the work stops, the silence feels wrong, as if the unfinished walls are listening. It was the summer of 2003, and I was part of a crew building out a big suburban housing development on the outskirts of Houston, Texas. The project was one of those cookie-cutter neighborhoods, rows of single-family homes with identical floor plans, all sprouting up like weeds in the humid Gulf Coast heat. We were in the foundation phase, pouring concrete slabs for a cluster of about a dozen houses at once. It was efficient that way, you know? Get the forms set, rebar in place, vapor barriers laid down, and then bring in the trucks to pour it all in one big go. The day in question was a scorcher, easily pushing 95 degrees with that thick, sticky humidity that makes your clothes cling to you like a second skin. We'd been at it since dawn, the whole team sweating buckets, chugging Gatorade, and wiping our brows with bandanas. But we were on schedule, which was a small miracle in construction. Delays cost money. And the foreman, a no-nonsense guy named Mike who'd been in the game for 20 years, was riding us hard to keep the momentum. "No breaks till the pour's done," he'd bark, though he'd crack a joke now and then to keep morale up. One of the laborers on the crew was this quiet fella named Luis. He was in his mid-30s, I'd guess, originally from Mexico, but had been in the States for years. Didn't talk much, kept to himself mostly, but he was reliable. Always showed up on time, did his job without complaint. That morning, as we were prepping for the pour on the house lot 7, Luis was assigned to double-check the vapor barrier under the rebar grid. It's that plastic sheeting that keeps moisture from seeping up through the slab later on. Sometimes it snags on the rebar or bunches up, and if you don't fix it, you've got problems down the line. I remember him crouching down inside the wooden forms, peering at a section near the corner. He muttered something in Spanish, probably cursing under his breath about a tear or a wrinkle in the barrier. I was standing right there, overseeing the setup, and I turned away for what couldn't have been more than 30 seconds to grab a trowel from the toolbox in my truck bed. It was parked just a few yards away, engine still idling from when I'd moved it earlier. When I spun back around, trowel in hand, Luis was gone. Just vanished. No sign of him anywhere in the immediate area. At first, I didn't think much of it. Figured he'd stepped off for a quick water break or to hit the porta potty. They were set up at the edge of the site. But then I noticed his stuff was still there, right by the form. A pair of worn leather gloves, his yellow tape measure coiled up like a snake, and his beat-up lunchbox with the faded sticker of some soccer team on it. That struck me as odd. Luis wasn't the type to leave his tools lying around. He was meticulous about that. I called out his name a couple times. "Luis? Hey, Luis!" and got no response. A few of the other guys nearby heard me and joined in, shouting across the site. We fanned out a bit, checking behind the trucks, around the material piles, even over by the excavator that was idling for the next lot. Nothing. The site wasn't huge, maybe a couple acres cleared out, but it was bustling with equipment and workers, so it was easy to lose sight of someone for a minute. Mike, the foreman, came over when he saw us poking around. He grumbled about the delay, but helped to look for a few more minutes. We checked the office trailer, the break area. Zip! No one had seen him walk off. In the end, Mike made the call to push on. "Can't hold up the whole pour for one guy," he said, though I could tell it bugged him too. Construction's like that sometimes. Time is money, and the concrete trucks were already en route. We figured Luis had maybe gotten a phone call or something and stepped away without saying anything. It happens. Personal stuff crops up. So we finished prepping, the trucks rolled in, and we poured the slab. It went smooth, hardened up over the next few days as expected. The crew wrapped the shift that evening like any other day. Tools cleaned, site secured, everyone heading home for beer and rest. A week later, though, we got word from the inspectors that there was a material issue with that particular slab on Lot 7. Something about inconsistencies in the cure. Air pockets or a bad batch of mix, they said. Nothing catastrophic, but it didn't meet code, so it had to be demoed and re-poured. We showed up with jackhammers and started breaking it up. One of the younger guys on the crew was working a section when he suddenly stopped, face going a bit pale, and waved Mike over. Turns out, embedded in the concrete was Luis's tape measure. Must have fallen in unnoticed during the rush of the pour. No big deal, really. Tools get lost in slabs all the time if you're not careful. But it explained why his stuff was left behind. We all had a chuckle about it later, though it added to the mystery of where he'd gone. The site didn't shut down or anything dramatic. We just cleared the debris, fixed the issue, and re-poured the next day. As for Luis, his family did file a missing persons report a couple days after he disappeared, which we heard about through the grapevine. The company cooperated with the police, but there wasn't much to go on. Turns out, after some digging by the cops, they tracked him down a few weeks later. He'd had a family emergency back home. His mom got real sick, and he got a call right around the time he was checking that barrier. Panicked, he just bolted from the site without a word, hopped in a cab or something, and caught the first bus out of town. Left his truck at the site. We'd thought it was parked off-site. And in the heat of the moment, forgot his gear. He was fine, just dealing with personal stuff. The company let it go. No hard feelings, though they docked his last check for the abandoned tools. We never saw him back on the job, but word got around that he was okay, working construction down in San Antonio or somewhere after sorting things out with his family. The project kept rolling. Slabs got poured, framing went up, houses got built. By fall, the whole development was wrapping up, families moving in, and we moved on to the next gig. It was back in 2011, when I was just starting out as an apprentice electrician in Toronto. I'd landed a gig on this massive underground parking garage project beneath a new high-rise in the downtown core. The site was a real labyrinth. Endless concrete corridors snaking every which way, temporary plywood walls thrown up to section off, unfinished rooms, and hazardous spots. Our foreman drilled it into us from day one. If there's a barrier up, you don't cross it. No exceptions. Those walls were there for a reason. Whether it was unstable rebar, open excavations, or just plain unsafe footing. Most days, the job was straightforward. I'd show up early, run conduit for lighting and power outlets, learn the ropes from the journeyman. But one evening, I volunteered to stay late. We were behind on a section of the third level down, and I figured putting in extra hours would score me some points with the crew. It was around 11 p.m. by the time everyone else had clocked out. The place was dead quiet, just the hum of the temporary fluorescence and the distant drip of water seeping through the unfinished ceiling. I was knee-deep in pulling wires through a fresh run of conduit, my tool belt clinking with every move, when I first heard it. It started as a faint tapping, echoing off the bare concrete walls. Rhythmic, like someone hammering metal on metal, but muffled, as if it was coming from a distance. Tap, tap, tap. Pause, tap, tap, tap. I paused, wiped the sweat from my forehead, and listened. Could be a welder wrapping up on another level, I thought. The site was huge, with multiple trades working overlapping shifts. Curiosity got the better of me. I grabbed my flashlight and followed the sound, weaving through the dimly lit hallways. The air got cooler and mustier as I went deeper, past a couple of those plywood barriers that I probably shouldn't have ducked under. But hey, I was young and invincible back then, right? The tapping grew louder, more insistent, pulling me along like a magnet. I rounded a corner into an area that was clearly off limits. Stacks of unused rebar leaning against the walls, exposed wiring dangling from the ceiling, and there it was. An opening in the floor, maybe 6 feet wide. No guardrails, no caution tape, nothing. Just a ragged-edged hole dropping straight down into blackness. It looked like some kind of ventilation or utility shaft that hadn't been mapped out properly on the blueprints. The tapping was definitely coming from down there, echoing up from what had to be at least a couple of stories below. I crouched at the edge, shining my flashlight into the void. But the beam didn't reach the bottom. Dust motes danced in the light, and the air rising up carried a stale, metallic tang. Leaning in a bit closer, straining to see if there was a ladder or platform down there, I heard something else. A single, sharp inhale, quick and hushed, like someone holding their breath and failing at it. It sent a chill right up my spine. Was there a person down there? A trapped worker? My mind raced. Maybe one of the night crew had fallen in, or hell, even a squatter who'd snuck onto the site. I froze, heart pounding, every instinct screaming to back off. I didn't call out or shine the light around more. I just eased back slowly, keeping my eyes on the edge until I was clear, then turned and hightailed it out of there. I didn't look back. Didn't stop until I was back in the lit-up section where I'd been working. Packed up my tools in record time and punched out. The whole drive home replaying that sound in my head. The next morning, I showed up early and went straight to my supervisor, Mike. He was this grizzled vet in his 50s, the kind of guy who'd seen it all on construction sites. I told him everything. The tapping, the shaft, the weird breathing noise. His face went stone cold serious. No jokes, no brushing it off. We grabbed hard hats and headed down to check it out. But when we got there, the hole was gone. Covered over with a fresh sheet of plywood, edges sealed with heavy-duty tape, and a big red sign slapped on it. Do not remove hazard. Mike just stared at it for a second, then turned to me. Kid, he said, don't ever go past the barriers again. Not for any reason. You hear something off, you report it right away. But you don't play hero. He wouldn't say a word about what might be down there. Changed the subject to the day's assignments. And that was that. For the next couple of weeks, things went back to normal. Or as normal as a job site gets. I stuck to my assigned areas, ran more conduit, helped wire up the emergency lighting systems. But the incident nagged at me. I'd catch myself glancing at barriers, wondering. Then, about 2 weeks later, the whole site got shut down for a full day. Official word was a routine safety inspection. Happens all the time on big projects like that. But during lunch the day before, I overheard one of the older electricians, a guy named Frank who'd been in the trade forever, talking low to another worker. "They pulled something out of that unmarked shaft last night," he muttered. "Wasn't part of the building plans. Some old utility access from the 80s. Forgotten when they demoed the previous structure. Had rusted pipes and wiring down there. Plus a bunch of debris that could have caused a collapse if it had shifted." Turns out, the tapping I'd heard was likely from loose metal banging around in the draft, or maybe even a rodent scavenging. Construction sites attract all kinds of critters. And that inhale? Probably just the wind whistling through the shaft, amplified by the echo, or my own imagination kicking in after a long shift. The something they pulled out was hazardous waste. Old asbestos-wrapped pipes and corroded electrical lines that needed proper disposal to meet code. The shutdown let the inspectors verify everything was secure, and by the next day, we were back at it. No injuries, no big drama. The project wrapped up a few months later, right on schedule. We finished the wiring, passed all the inspections, and the garage opened as part of the new building. I moved on to other jobs, got my full certification, and looking back, that night was just one of those weird site stories you tell over beers. Taught me to respect the rules, though. Construction's dangerous enough without wandering off the path. It was back in the summer of 1995, and I was working as a site supervisor on this big shopping complex project in Manchester. I'd been in construction for about a decade by then, starting out as a laborer and working my way up. The job was straightforward enough, building a massive foundation for what would become one of those shiny retail hubs with shops, cafes, and all the trimmings. The site was right on the edge of the city center, noisy during the day with trucks rumbling in and out, but eerily quiet at night when most of the crew had gone home. That particular day started early, around 5 a.m. We had a fleet of cement mixers lined up, pouring the foundation slab for the main structure. It was a huge pour. Thousands of cubic meters of concrete, mixed with the usual aggregates, water, and some chemical admixtures to help it set faster in the humid English weather. The team was buzzing. We had to get it done before the afternoon rain hit, as forecasted. I remember overseeing the vibrators compacting the mix, making sure there were no voids or honeycombs. By midday, the slab was leveled off, and we left it to cure under plastic sheeting to keep the moisture in. Shift ended around 3 p.m., and everyone headed off for a well-earned pint or home to their families. I volunteered for the evening check that night. Nothing formal, just a quick walk around to ensure the barriers were up and no kids or vandals had snuck in. It was about 9 p.m., dusk settling in, and the site was lit by those harsh sodium lamps we had strung up. I was strolling along the edge of the fresh slab when I heard it. A muffled banging, like someone tapping from inside a drum. It wasn't loud, but it was rhythmic. Bang, pause, bang again. My heart skipped a beat. I'd heard stories from old-timers about accidents on sites, folks slipping into forms or getting buried under collapses, but nothing like this. I knelt down, pressed my ear to the concrete, and there it was again. Faint but definite. Panic set in. What if one of the lads had fallen in during the pour? We had a full head count at shift end, but mistakes happen. I radioed the foreman right away, but he was off-site, so I called emergency services myself. "There's banging coming from the concrete slab," I told the dispatcher. "Might be someone trapped." Within 20 minutes, the fire brigade showed up with lights flashing, followed by police. They cordoned off the area, and we discussed options. Breaking into fresh concrete isn't ideal. It could ruin the integrity. But if there was a life at stake, no question. They brought in jackhammers and started chipping away at a section near where I'd heard the noise. I paced back and forth, sweating despite the cool night air, replaying the day in my head. Had anyone been near the mixer chute unsupervised? The pour had gone smoothly, but doubt creeps in during moments like that. After about an hour of careful excavation, maybe a meter deep, they found nothing. No body, no tools, not even a void big enough for a person. Just solid, setting concrete with some minor air bubbles popping as they exposed it. The firefighters shrugged it off as possibly the sound of the mix settling or rebar contracting in the cooling temperature. Concrete does that sometimes. Expands and contracts. Makes popping or thumping noises as it cures. I felt like a right idiot, but better safe than sorry, they said. They patched the spot with fresh mix from a spare bag we had on site, and everyone packed up by midnight. I went home exhausted, but relieved. 2 days later, things got weirder. I was back on day shift, and a couple of the lads started complaining about a foul, metallic smell wafting from the same area of the slab. It wasn't overpowering, but sharp, like rust mixed with chemicals. Word spread quick, and soon half the crew was muttering about it. The project manager, a no-nonsense bloke named Alan, halted work for 48 hours to investigate. We called in the concrete supplier's engineers and some health and safety inspectors. They took samples, drilled core tests, and even brought in air quality monitors. I was interviewed again, recounting the banging incident, and I could see the skepticism in their eyes. Turns out, the smell was from a reaction in the admixtures. Some ferrous sulfate in the mix had interacted with moisture from a light rain that seeped under the sheeting, creating a temporary off-gassing. Nothing hazardous, just unpleasant, and common enough in big pours if the weather turns. The banging? Likely the same settling process, amplified by the hollow forms underneath, or even echoes from nearby traffic on the motorway. No evidence of anyone or anything trapped. The investigation wrapped up clean. Reports filed, all clear given. A few crew members quit anyway, superstitious types who couldn't shake the rumor that someone had been entombed. Whispers like that stick in construction circles. Blokes love a good yarn over tea breaks. We resumed work the next week, reinforced the slab where needed, and pushed on. The foundation set solid, and the rest of the build went without a hitch. Steel frames up, walls in, roof on. By late 1996, the shopping complex opened to the public, full of shoppers and no one the wiser about our little scare. I stayed on the job till the end, then moved to another site in Liverpool. Looking back, it was just one of those odd site anomalies that gets blown out of proportion. The place is still there today, thriving. And whenever I pass by, I chuckle at the memory. Back in 2010, I was working as a site foreman on one of those massive tower projects in Dubai, the kind that seemed to scrape the sky and never end. The city was booming then, with cranes dotting the horizon like some futuristic forest. Our crew was a mix of locals and expats, all grinding through long shifts under the relentless sun. Hassan was our lead crane operator, a guy in his late 40s who'd been in the business for over 2 decades. He was reliable as they come. Always on time, meticulous with his logs. And he had this calm demeanor that made everyone feel safe, even when we were hoisting tons of steel hundreds of feet up. It was a typical evening in late summer. Hot as hell during the day, but cooling off a bit as the sun dipped low. We were wrapping up for the shift around 6 p.m., the kind of time when everyone's eager to clock out, grab some shawarma, and head home. Hassan was up in the tower crane, handling the last load drop of the day, a bundle of rebar that needed to be positioned on the 45th floor. He radioed down to me and the team, his voice crackling over the static as usual. "Just need a few more minutes to set this down steady," he said. "Don't want it shifting overnight." No big deal. We'd all waited on him before, and he was the pro, so we gave him the space. 10 minutes ticked by, and nothing. The crane arm hadn't budged an inch. I glanced up at the cab, silhouetted against the orange sky, and called him on the radio. "Hassan, you good up there? We're all set down here." Silence. Tried again, louder this time. Still nothing. The guys started murmuring. Maybe his radio battery died. Or worse, he could have had a heat stroke or heart issue. It happens in this line of work. The isolation up there can mask problems until it's too late. Our safety officer, Ahmed, a burly Egyptian with years of experience, volunteered to climb up. It's no small feat. Over 200 meters straight up via the ladder inside the crane mast, with the wind whipping around you. Took him about 15 minutes to reach the cab. We watched from below, radios glued to our ears. When he finally keyed in, his voice was puzzled, not panicked. "He's not here. Cab's empty." We all froze. Ahmed described it step by step. The door was still locked from the inside, the kind of latch you have to flip manually. Hassan's lunchbox was on the side console, half-eaten falafel wrap inside. His water bottle still condensation cold like he'd just sipped it. The radio was clipped to the dash, volume up. No sign it had been tampered with. But the eeriest detail Ahmed mentioned was the controls. They were still settling, like the joystick had been released just seconds before he arrived. A faint hydraulic hum fading out, as if Hassan had stepped away mid-operation. Panic set in quick. We shut down the site, called in security, and started a full search. Ground teams combed the base, checking every nook, scaffolding, material stacks, even the portable toilets. Up top, guys on the upper floors swept the structure, yelling his name. No one had seen him climb down. The ladder was the only way, and it's visible from half a dozen vantage points on the ground. We reviewed the CCTV feeds from the side entrance and perimeter. Nothing. No Hassan walking out. No unexplained vehicles. The police got involved that night, treating it as a possible accident or foul play. They interviewed everyone, dusted the cab for prints, but it all came back clean. His family was notified. His wife said he'd seemed fine that morning. No arguments, no health complaints. For weeks, the mystery hung over the project like a cloud. Productivity dipped. Guys were spooked, whispering about heat mirages or worse. We brought in a temp operator, but the vibe was off. Then, about 3 weeks later, during a routine inspection of the elevator's shaft, a mechanic found Hassan's harness and hard hat. They were neatly placed on the roof of the elevator machinery room, a sealed-off area with no ladder access from the floors below or above. It was like they'd been dropped from the sky. The police redoubled efforts, checking for hidden routes or accomplices, but zip. Turns out, After piecing it together with forensics and some overlooked details, it wasn't as bizarre as it seemed. Hassan had been dealing with burnout. Subtle signs we'd all missed, like him skipping breaks or staring off during downtime. The investigation revealed he'd rigged a makeshift descent using spare rigging lines from the crane's storage compartment, lowering himself down the back side of the tower, out of sight from the main ground views. The controls? Just residual pressure in the system. Happens sometimes if you let go abruptly. He must have locked the door behind him out of habit, left his stuff in a rush. Why the machinery room? He climbed across a service beam. Dangerous as hell, but doable for someone with his experience. And stashed his gear there, maybe planning to retrieve it later or just ditching it in panic. Hassan surfaced a month after, back home in Jordan. He'd had a breakdown up there, overwhelmed by the job's stress and family pressures he hadn't shared. Snuck off-site through a blind spot in the fence, caught a cab to the airport, and flew out on a one-way ticket. No criminal intent, just a man at his limit. We wrapped the project 6 months later, on schedule despite the hiccup. The tower stands tall today, part of Dubai's skyline. Hassan? He got help, switched to ground-level work in construction management. Last I heard, he's doing fine. Even sent an apology email to the crew. It was back in 2003, in Brisbane, Australia. I was working as a demolition crew member for a big construction firm. We'd been contracted to tear down this old hotel in the city center. It had been abandoned for at least a decade, maybe more. The place was a relic from the 70s or 80s, all faded glamour turned to rot. Broken windows, graffiti everywhere, pigeons nesting in the lobby. The city wanted to clear the site for a shiny new office tower, so our job was to gut the interior first, remove hazards, strip out valuables like copper wiring, and make sure nothing unexpected collapsed during the heavy machinery phase. We started from the ground up, floor by floor. It was grueling work, hauling out moldy carpets, smashing through drywall, dealing with the dust that got into every pore. By the time we hit the 5th floor, we were about halfway through the building. That level had been guest rooms mostly, but time had turned them into storage dumps for junk. Old mattresses piled high, shattered mirrors, even some forgotten luggage that we had to check for anything worth salvaging. That's where we found the door. It was at the end of a narrow hallway, tucked away behind what used to be a service elevator shaft. Unlike the other doors, which were flimsy wood or rusted metal that gave way easily, this one was a solid fire door. Thick steel, painted institutional gray, with no handle or knob on the outside. Someone had gone to the trouble of welding a heavy steel plate over the seams, sealing it shut like they never wanted it opened again. I remember shining my flashlight on it and thinking it looked out of place, almost deliberate. The foreman, a grizzled guy named Mick, who'd been in the business for 30 years, glanced at it during our walkthrough and shrugged. "Leave it," he said. "Probably an old utility closet or something. Not worth the hassle. We've got quotas to meet." But a few of us on the crew, me, my mate Dave, and this young bloke named Tim, couldn't shake it. During our lunch break, we talked it over. "What if there's something valuable in there?" Dave said, half joking. "Gold bars or hidden cash from the hotel's heyday." Tim was more spooked, saying it gave him the creeps, but curiosity won out. We decided to take a crack at it after the main shift, When Mick was busy elsewhere, we grabbed an angle grinder from the tool van, suited up with masks and goggles against the sparks, and got to work. The weld was tough, thick and professional, like it had been done with intent. But after about 20 minutes of grinding and prying, the plate gave way. The door creaked open on its hinges, and this wave of air hit us. Stale doesn't even cover it. It was like opening a tomb, thick with dust and a metallic tang that made my eyes sting and my throat close up. We coughed and fanned it away, then stepped inside with our flashlights. The room was tiny, maybe 3 meters by 3. No windows, no vents that I could see. Just bare concrete walls and a low ceiling that felt oppressive. The floor was littered with old construction tools, a rusty hammer, some chisels, a coil of frayed electrical wire, all covered in a layer of grime that suggested no one had touched them in years. Stacks of yellowed newspapers were piled in one corner, the top one dated from the mid-'80s. Headlines about some local election or whatever. But what really caught our attention was in the middle of the room. A single metal folding chair, the kind you'd see in a community hall, bolted to the floor as if to keep it from moving. Chained to the chair's armrest was a pair of handcuffs. They were open, not locked, but rusted solid from age and moisture. The chain was short, welded right into the chair's frame. No way to slip out without a key or tools. We stared at it for a minute, joking nervously about some kinky hotel guest. But then we noticed the walls. They were covered in scratches, deep gouges dug into the concrete. Not random vandalism, but deliberate marks. Grouped in clusters of 5, like tally marks for counting days. There must have been hundreds of them, maybe thousands, if you added up all the walls. Some were faded, others sharper, as if made over a long period. It hit me then. This wasn't a storage room. It looked like a cell, improvised and forgotten. We didn't stick around long. Snapped a quick photo on Dave's old flip phone for laughs, then backed out. But word got back to Mick fast. Tim must have blabbed. The foreman stormed over, red-faced and yelling. What the hell were you thinking? That room's not on any blueprints. We could have had structural issues or asbestos or God knows what. He made us weld it shut right then and there, using fresh plates from the supply truck. No arguments, no explanations. We finished the shift in silence, and Mick docked our pay for the unauthorized delay. The rest of the job went smoothly enough. We cleared the upper floors over the next few weeks. More junk, a few surprises like a nest of possums in the attic. But nothing as weird as that room. The heavy demo started in late spring. Bulldozers and wrecking balls brought the whole structure down in a cloud of dust. By summer, the site was flattened. Foundations poured for the new tower. I stuck around for the early phases of the build, laying rebar and concrete, but eventually moved on to another project across town. It wasn't until about 2 months after the demolition, during a wrap-up meeting at the site office, that the manager pulled me aside. He was an older fella from the city planning department, going over paperwork. "Heard about that odd room you boys found," he said casually, sipping his coffee. Turns out, city records mention a maintenance worker who went missing back in '85. Last seen on the 5th floor during some renovations. Cops searched but came up empty. Case went cold. Probably just a coincidence, but thought you'd want to know. I nodded, felt a chill run through me, but that was it. No ghosts, no follow-ups. The hotel was gone. The office tower went up on schedule, and life moved on. I still think about those scratches sometimes, wondering what really happened in there, but in the end, it was just another job. It was back in the summer of '96, right in the heart of Dallas, Texas. I was just a young laborer then, fresh out of my 20s, working on this massive office tower project downtown. The kind of building that was going to scrape the sky, all glass and steel, but we were still in the guts of it. Down in the underground levels where the parking garage was taking shape. I'd been on the crew for a few months, hauling rebar, mixing batches, and keeping the site clean. It wasn't glamorous work, but it paid the bills. And there was something satisfying about seeing a hole in the ground turn into something solid. That particular morning started like any other. We were up before dawn, the air thick with that humid Texas heat, even at 4 a.m. The foreman, a grizzled guy named Hank, who'd been in construction since before I was born, had us prepping for one of the biggest pours of the job, the slab for the lowest parking level. We're talking thousands of cubic yards of concrete, trucks lined up like soldiers, pumps humming, and the whole crew buzzing with that mix of exhaustion and focus. I was on the smoothing team, raking and leveling as the mix came in, making sure it spread even without air pockets or weak spots. We'd been at it for a couple hours when the first section started to set up a bit. The concrete was still wet, that glossy gray slurry that looks almost like pudding before it hardens. I was walking the edge, checking for bubbles, when something caught my eye in the middle of the pour. At first, I thought it was just a shadow from the floodlights, or maybe some water pooling unevenly. Construction sites are full of tricks like that, especially in low light. But as I got closer, squatting down with my rake in hand, it looked off. There was this dark, wet stain spreading out in the slab, maybe 5 or 6 feet long, curved like a person lying on their side, knees pulled up to their chest. It wasn't just a blob. There were these subtle indentations, faint dips in the surface where you'd expect eyes, a nose, maybe even the outline of a mouth slightly open. Hell, it even had what looked like the ridge of an arm tucked under. My heart skipped a beat. I won't lie. I'd heard all sorts of stories on job sites. Guys talking about old burial grounds or accidents from past builds. But I wasn't one for superstition. Still, it freaked me out enough that I hollered over to Hank. "Hey, boss, come take a look at this. Looks like someone's outline in the concrete here." Hank ambled over, wiping sweat from his brow with the back of his glove, and knelt down beside me. We both stared at it for a good minute, the pumps droning in the background. "What the hell?" he muttered, poking at it gently with the end of his boot. The stain was darker than the rest, almost like oil had seeped up from below, but there was no smell, no residue. Those indentations were clear as day under the lights. 2 shallow pits for eyes, a slight groove for the mouth. We even shone a flashlight on it from different angles to see if it was just an illusion, but nope, it held up. A couple other guys wandered over, murmuring and pointing, and for a second, the whole pour slowed down as word spread. Hank straightened up, shaking his head with a chuckle. Probably just some chemical reaction in the mix. Maybe a batch with too much water or air bubbles popping weird. Or hell, could be the ground settling funny under the weight. Ain't the first time concrete's played tricks on us. He clapped me on the shoulder. "Good eye, kid. But let's not turn this into a ghost story. We got a schedule to keep." We watched it for a bit longer as the concrete started to cure. Sure enough, as the surface dried and the moisture evaporated, that dark wetness faded away, like it was being absorbed back into the slab. By the time the sun was peeking over the horizon, all that was left was a faint outline, barely noticeable unless you knew where to look. We smoothed over the edges as best we could, added a little extra layer on top to even it out, and kept pouring. The trucks kept coming. The crew got back to work. And by noon, that whole section was buried under more concrete and rebar grids for the next level. The rest of the shift dragged on like usual, hot, sweaty with breaks for water and sandwiches from the lunch truck. We wrapped up around 3 p.m., tools cleaned, sites secured, and headed home with sore backs and the satisfaction of another day's progress. The project rolled on without a hitch after that. We finished the underground levels by fall, topped out the tower the following year, and I stuck around until the whole thing was handed over to the owners in 98. Last I heard, it's still standing tall, full of offices and folks going about their business. That weird stain? Never crossed my mind much after that day. Construction's full of oddities like that, explainable ones, once you think about them. I remember it like it was yesterday, even though it's been years now. My name's Jack Thompson, and back in 2017, I was working as a night shift security guard on a big high-rise construction site in Melbourne CBD. The building was called the Aurora Tower. Sleek, modern thing with glass facades and all the bells and whistles for luxury apartments. We were in the final stages, just a couple of months from handover. The days were buzzing with electricians, plumbers, and painters wrapping up. But nights were quiet. Too quiet sometimes. That's when it started. It was around 2 a.m. on my third week there. I was doing my rounds on the lower levels, flashlight in hand, checking doors and making sure no tools were left out for thieves. The elevator shafts were still open in parts, safety barriers up, of course. But you could hear the wind whistling through them from the upper floors. At first, I thought that's all it was. Wind. But then, as I passed the main shaft on level 3, I heard it. A low, muffled crying. Not like a baby or anything dramatic. Just this soft, pained sobbing that echoed up from the darkness below. It sent a chill down my spine, but I figured it was an animal trapped somewhere. Maybe a possum that had wandered in from the nearby parks. I radioed it into the site manager, but he was off shift, so I noted it in the log and kept going. The next night, same time, same place, it happened again. This time, it was clearer, almost like a voice murmuring. I leaned over the barrier, shining my light down, but the shaft dropped straight into blackness, maybe 20 stories deep at that point. Nothing. No movement, no reflections. I called it in again, and by morning, the engineers were on it. The lead engineer, a bloke named Raj, brought a team down with harnesses and cameras. They rappelled partway, inspected the cables, the pulleys, the whole setup. Came up empty-handed. Probably just the building settling, Raj said, wiping sweat from his brow. Concrete expands and contracts, makes all sorts of noises, or wind channeling through the vents. Made sense to me. I'm no expert, but I've worked construction sites before, and old buildings creak like arthritic knees. We laughed it off over coffee that morning, but the cries didn't stop. Over the next few weeks, it became a regular thing. I'd hear it on my rounds, Sometimes just the crying, other times accompanied by what sounded like a faint whisper. "Help me." It was eerie, no denying that. I'd pause, listen, then move on, telling myself it was echoes or my imagination playing tricks in the dead of night. But word spread fast among the crew. The day shift guys started joking about it. "Jack's got a ghost in the shaft." But you could tell some were spooked. A few subcontractors even refused to work near the elevators after dark, claiming it gave them the creeps. One evening, as we were clocking in, this older subcontractor named Mick pulled me aside. He'd been around Melbourne's building scene for decades, gray hair and calloused hands to prove it. "You know what used to be on this lot?" he asked, lighting a smoke outside the site office. Turns out, back in the 1940s, there was a run-down tenement building here, cheap housing for factory workers during the post-war boom. In 1949, a maintenance worker named Harold something or other was fixing the old lift when the cables snapped. He plummeted down the shaft, right about where our modern one now stood. Died on impact, poor bastard. Mick had heard the story from his dad, who worked the demolition crew when they tore the tenement down in the 80s to make way for offices. That hit me hard. Suddenly, the cries felt personal, like an echo from the past. I started wondering if the sounds were some kind of acoustic trick, the wind mimicking that old tragedy, or maybe it was psychological. Once you hear a story like that, your brain fills in the blanks. Either way, we kept reporting it, and the site safety officer even brought in acoustic experts. They set up microphones and ran tests. Their verdict? Structural vibrations from the nearby tram lines, amplified by the shaft's design. "Nothing supernatural," the report said. "Recommend additional soundproofing in the final fit-out." We pushed through. The cries didn't go away entirely, but they seemed to fade as we sealed up the shafts and installed the elevator cars. Maybe it was the extra insulation, or maybe we all just got used to it. By the end of the project, the building was gleaming, lobbies polished, apartments ready for handover. I finished my last shift on a crisp autumn morning, handed in my badge, and that was that. The tower opened on schedule, residents moved in, and life went on. Looking back, I reckon it was all explainable. Wind, vibrations, a dash of urban legend to spice up the boredom of night shifts. Melbourne's full of old stories like that. Ghosts of the gold rush era, echoes from the convict days. But in the end, the job got done. The building stands tall, and I've moved on to other sites. No lingering mysteries, just another chapter in the city's history, buried under layers of concrete and glass. I remember that project like it was yesterday, even though it's been over a decade now. My name's Ji-Hoon Park, and back in 2011, I was working as a safety inspector for a major construction firm in Seoul. We'd been contracted to build this sleek, high-rise office tower in Gangnam. Nothing out of the ordinary, just another glass and steel behemoth rising up to scrape the skyline. I was in my mid-30s then, fresh off a string of smaller jobs. And this was my first big one. Safety inspections were my bread and butter. Checking scaffolds, ensuring harnesses were up to code, making sure no one was cutting corners on fire exits or electrical wiring. It was routine stuff, but the pay was good. And I prided myself on being the level-headed guy who kept everyone grounded. The trouble started around the midway point of the build, when we hit the upper floors. The 13th floor, that's where it all centered. Superstition runs deep in Korea, you know? 13's an unlucky number in the West, but here it's more about the number 4 sounding like death in Chinese characters. Still, folks were whispering. It began with the night crew, the guys who worked the late shifts to keep the project on schedule. They'd come down in the mornings looking rattled, refusing to go back up after dark. At first, I dismissed it as fatigue. Construction's grueling, and long hours in the summer heat can play tricks on your mind. But the stories kept piling up, and they were eerily consistent. One welder, a burly guy named Min-soo, told me over lunch one day that he'd been finishing some rebar work up there when he heard footsteps echoing behind him in the unfinished hallways. Not loud, just soft padding, like someone in socks trailing him. He'd spin around, flashlight swinging, and nothing. Empty corridor, dust sheets fluttering in the breeze from the open framework. It happened 3 times that night, he said, each time the steps matching his pace perfectly, stopping dead when he did. He laughed it off at first, but by the end of his shift, he was bolting for the elevator. Then there were the tools. Electricians complained their drills and pliers would vanish from where they'd left them. Poof, gone in minutes. They'd search high and low, cursing under their breath, only to find everything stacked in a neat pyramid right in the center of the floor, like some kid's building blocks. No fingerprints, no dust disturbed around them. One foreman even joked it was the ghost of a disgruntled architect, but the laughter was nervous. Pretty soon, the rumors spread to the day crew too. Productivity dipped. Guys started calling in sick or requesting transfers to lower floors. The site manager was furious. Delays meant penalties, and we were already pushing against a tight deadline for the client's move-in. I didn't buy into the supernatural crap. I'd seen my share of hauntings on sites before. Turned out to be rats in the walls, wind whistling through gaps, or even sabotage from rival crews. So, when the manager pulled me aside and asked me to look into it, I volunteered to stay overnight. "Prove it's just paranoia," he said. "Get the team back on track." I figured it'd be easy. Walk the floor, document everything, maybe catch a prankster in the act. I grabbed my toolkit, a flashlight, and an old digital audio recorder I used for logging inspection notes. It was basic, but it had a decent mic and could run for hours on batteries. That evening, as the sun dipped behind the Seoul skyline, I rode the construction elevator up to 13. The floor was about 60% done. Concrete poured, walls framed out, but no drywall yet. Just skeletal hallways with exposed beams and dangling wires. The air was thick with that new build smell. Fresh cement, sawdust, and a hint of ozone from the welding. I was alone. The last workers had clocked out at 7 p.m. and security was down in the lobby. I set the recorder on a sawhorse in the main open area, hit record, and started my patrol. I walked deliberately, announcing my steps out loud for the tape. Moving down hallway A, checking for loose scaffolding, to create a clear audio log. At first, it was dead quiet. My boots echoed on the bare floor, and I could hear the distant hum of traffic from below. I inspected the usual spots: fire suppression pipes, emergency exits, electrical panels. Nothing amiss. But about 20 minutes in, I felt it. A prickle on the back of my neck, like I was being watched. I chalked it up to the isolation, high up like that, with the city lights twinkling far below. It's easy to get jumpy. I kept walking, looping through the corridors, my flashlight beam cutting through the shadows. No footsteps followed me. No tools moved. After an hour, I called it a night, retrieved the recorder, and headed down. Locked up, drove home to my apartment in Yongsan, and crashed. The next morning, I played the tape back in my office before the crew arrived. At first, it was just my voice and my footsteps, clear as day. But then, layered underneath, a second set, soft, almost inaudible at first, but syncing perfectly with mine. Thud, thud, pause when I paused. It wasn't an echo. The timing was too precise, like someone mirroring me, step for step. And woven in, faint whispers in Korean. I had to crank the volume and replay it a dozen times to make it out. Fall, fall, repeated like a mantra, breathy and urgent. My skin crawled. I wasn't a believer, but that tape shook me. I copied it to my computer, time-stamped it, and headed back to the site. When I got to the 13th floor, it was worse. The entire space, every inch of the dusty concrete, was covered in a thin layer of footprints. Small ones, like bare feet, crisscrossing in chaotic patterns. None matched my boot treads. I'd worn steel toes, and these were smooth, almost childlike. They clustered around where I'd left the recorder, fanning out to the edges. I took photos, measured a few, about size 6 or 7, nothing distinctive. The crew showed up soon after, and word spread like wildfire. Min Soo and the others refused to work up there until we cleansed it or something. I reported it all to the manager, playing him the tape. He was skeptical at first, but the footprints convinced him we had a problem. Maybe vandalism, maybe a squatter sneaking in. We beefed up security, installed temporary cameras, added night patrols, even brought in a locksmith to secure the access points. I reviewed the building plans and found an old service duct that could have allowed entry from the 12th floor, sealed it up tight. We also interviewed the crew quietly. Turns out a couple of younger workers admitted to spreading the initial rumors as a joke, but they swore they hadn't been up there that night. The footprints? Could have been from earlier in the day, disturbed by wind or something. The tape? Well, maybe audio artifacts from the echoing space. I wasn't fully convinced, but it was enough to move forward. In the end, we got back on track. The hauntings stopped after the security upgrades. No more missing tools, no more footsteps. The whispers on the tape? I analyzed it with some free software later. Turned out it might have been Wen through the vents, distorting my own breathing. Or maybe it was just my imagination filling in the blanks. The project wrapped on time that fall. The 13th floor became executive offices, leased out to a tech firm. Last I heard, no complaints. I moved on to other jobs, but I kept that tape as a reminder. Sometimes the scariest things are the ones we build up in our heads.